Hello and welcome to Global Eye. I'm Parikshit Luthra. As India grapples with an unprecedented spike in COVID cases and insufficient vaccine supply, External Affairs Minister Jai Shankar is in the United States meeting top officials of the Biden administration. Key issues on the agenda for his 5-day trip include procuring vaccines and raw materials for India from U.S. companies. The minister met U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, USTR Catherine Tai. He also met members of the U.S.-India Strategic Partnership Forum, as well as the U.S.-India Business Council and members of the U.S. Global COVID Task Force. The United States has announced it will be donating 80 million vaccine doses to several nations who are facing shortages. 60 million doses will be the AstraZeneca vaccine, and the remaining 20 million would be from Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson. However, the U.S. has not announced how much of these 80 million doses will go to India. What can India expect from the United States in terms of COVID support? To take this discussion forward, we're now joined by Congressman Raja Krishnamoorthi. Mr. Krishnamoorthi represents Illinois' 8th Congressional District. Also joining us on the show is Mukesh Aghi, President of the U.S.-India Strategic Partnership Forum. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us here on Global Eye. Congressman Krishnamoorthi, if I can begin with you. The U.S. has pledged 80 million vaccine doses to the world. You are among the congressmen who are urging the United States to help India during this medical crisis, during the second wave. How much of these 80 million doses should make their way to India? Have you sent any representation to the U.S. government in this regard?
Thank you so much, Parikshit. And I've said that a large number of those doses should go to India. But we've actually proposed something much more expansive than that. I've proposed something called NOVID, which is a play on words, no more COVID. This NOVID Act would actually set up a program to vaccinate 60% of India's population, along with 60% of the population of low and middle income countries throughout the world. And I think that this is incredibly important. It would be modeled off of what we did with regard to HIV/AIDS in Africa. And I believe that not only is this the morally right thing to do, but it's the smart thing to do to protect Americans and to protect the progress that we've made here, both economically and in terms of vaccinations in the United States.
Right. That is heartening to know, Congressman Krishnamoorthi. The other question that I'd also like to ask you, you along with some other congressmen have requested for a briefing from the Biden administration as part of an inquiry to ensure vaccines are deployed rapidly in India. Have you got any kind of feelers from the Biden administration as to how many doses may be released for India and how they may encourage other vaccine makers to export vaccines to India?
Not yet. I'm actually a member of the Special Select Committee on COVID. And basically, as part of that committee, I've asked for a briefing, and I believe that it's coming up. I think the main issue right now is that they are trying to make sure that the vaccine doses that they're trying to allocate to India and other countries is actually safe. You may have heard about this, but many of these vaccine doses, these excess vaccine doses, especially the AstraZeneca ones, were produced at a factory in Baltimore, Maryland, which is now under scrutiny for safety concerns. And I just grilled or interrogated the CEO of the company that owns that factory, and I'm not satisfied by the answers that he provided. And so first we have to make sure that these vaccines are safe before they're shipped anywhere in the world, including India.
Right, that's an important point. You're saying first these vaccines have to be safe, and you've also raised concerns about the production, the quality of those vaccines that have been produced. Mukesh Aghi, if I can come to you, you were very much there in those business roundtables. You're also leading the Global Task Force along with Nisha Biswal. What is your sense on the legal issues that U.S. pharma companies, vaccine makers, are flagging before the External Affairs Minister when it comes to exporting vaccines to India?
Well, the U.S. government has given the vaccine makers indemnification and liability issues. And almost 70 countries around the world have given that indemnification. The vaccine makers are asking the same thing with the central government of India to provide indemnification, at the same time be able to recognize these vaccines on an emergency basis so that they can be inoculated. So I think the request is all across the world. It's not specific towards India. And that discussions are happening between the vaccine makers and government of India, which I'm not privy to, but I think the process continues. And the feedback we're getting is the vaccine makers are very keen to support supplying vaccines to India on an urgent basis.
All right. You're saying that they're keen to supply vaccines to India on an urgent basis. But if we look at their order book, it's full right now with orders from the European Union, from Japan, from the United States as well. Many of these vaccine companies are members of the US ISPF, US IBC. Do you get a sense on how fast these vaccines will be made available to India, Mr. Aghi? Do you also feel that manufacturing these vaccines in India is a long way off?
So I think the two-part question. The first one is you have to look at by July, US will have an excess supply of 300 million vaccines. And from a vaccine diplomacy perspective, we do expect the Biden administration take the lead and distribute that across the world. The second factor which we see it is that the vaccine makers' capacity is increasing. We expect, for example, Pfizer to produce over 1.2 billion vaccines this year, and by end of next year, their capacity will go above 2 billion shots. You look at Johnson & Johnson, which is coming also in the market, their capacity is increasing itself. So we do expect by July, you will see a lot of this excess supply coming in, and it's up to the vaccine makers and the administration to be able to decide where the vaccine goes on a priority basis.
Right. Congressman Krishnamoorthi, considering your experience and the US experience with vaccinating its population, we believe that 5th of June is going to be celebrated as a COVID-free country day for the United States. Having said that, what do you think India needs to do in order to remove those hurdles for vaccine makers like Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson to supply vaccines to India and to manufacture in India as well?
Well, I think that it's not my place or position to tell the Indian government what to do. But what we need to do in the United States is make, as Mukesh pointed out, that any excess vaccines, any excess resources that we have in the United States be distributed around the world. But the need is very, very high. We estimate that the world will need 8 billion doses of vaccine with a B to make sure that we reach herd immunity in places like India and other hard-hit countries throughout Africa, Central America, and other places. My NOVID Act, which stands for Neutralizing Opportunities for Variants to Infect and Decimate, NOVID, gets at the problem which epidemiologists have identified, which is that within 1 year, if we do not do our part to help vaccinate the rest of the world, those variants will defeat the vaccines that have been utilized to vaccinate upwards of 50% of our population at this point right now. So this makes all the sense in the world to make sure that we vaccinate the rest of the world, because it's not only, again, the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do.
It is a smart thing to do, and very significantly, when you're talking about vaccinating and developing herd immunity in a majority of the global population, including India, WHO, Gavi and CPI sent out an urgent SOS yesterday to the global community, saying that today we need vaccines more than ever before. There has been a severe impact on COVAX supply chains as a result of the pandemic surge in India, and COVAX is going to fall short by 190 million doses by the end of June. How important, how critical is the US-India partnership to ensure that the world is vaccinated and there is equitable vaccine distribution?
It's absolutely vital. Unfortunately, some people say the COVAX efforts have been valiant, but COVAX equals no vax at this point. Not enough people have been vaccinated. And we need the United States as the indispensable power in the world, working with the largest democracy in the world, India, and the largest vaccine producer in the world, India, to be there for the rest of the world right now. And that means we have to enter into cooperative agreements right away for the Indian vaccine manufacturers to be able to get vaccine materials, to spin up vaccine doses ASAP as part of the quadrilateral initiative, also known as the Quad, whereby India, the US, Australia, and the Japanese government to basically supply vaccine doses throughout Asia and the world. And we need to do that right now.
Right. Mr. Aghi, coming back to those 80 million vaccine doses that the Biden administration will be distributing to the world over the next 6 weeks or so, have you got a sense from vaccine makers and also the administration as to how many doses may be allocated to India? What is the criteria they're going to use?
You have to understand, under the Defense Procurement Act, it is difficult for these manufacturers to export on their own vaccines to any other geography. As soon as they manufacture, it comes under the control of the federal government in the US, and then they decide, because they have contributed billions of dollars on R&D and manufacturing these vaccines. So I think it's a decision of the Biden administration as to how and when they will distribute this vaccine. I just want to also add to what Congressman Krishnamoorthi mentioned about India producing for the rest of the world through Quad. In the Quad meeting, it was agreed that the Indian vaccine maker BioE will manufacture 1 billion Johnson & Johnson vaccines, which will be distributed to Indo-Pacific region itself. And you have to understand, as much as we try to move in manufacturing of the Moderna and Pfizer to India, it is going to be very, very difficult because it's a new technology. You don't have resources available. You don't have manpower available to manufacture these vaccines. So I think it's important that we work on increasing immediately the capacity in the US and Europe to be able to produce that. Otherwise, what's going to happen is while you focus on transfer of technology, it will take time for that to ramp up.
It will take time for that to ramp up. But also speaking to you about the foreign minister's visit, you were there as part of that business forum meeting, Mr. Aghi. What was External Affairs Minister's message to the business community on COVID cooperation, on vaccine supplies and procuring vaccine raw materials?
Well, I think the discussion was more on appreciation of the corporate America stepping up. The sentiment I've never seen so strong between corporate America and India. They're committed. They believe that is a true partnership, and they focus on what else they can do. And you have to understand, between the corporate America and the Indian diaspora, we estimate by end of July or early August, they would have shipped supplies worth $1 billion into India itself. And it's important to understand that the corporate America employs almost 4 million direct employees in India. And then it's the indirect numbers are almost close to 40 million people itself. So the sentiment was strong. There was discussion, cooperation. And you have to understand also the investment sentiment in India is still very, very strong. In fact, if you look at the FDI coming into India, is up by 20% from the US itself. So overall, I would say that the discussions were very, very transparent. They focus on what else can be done to support India to come out of this crisis and drive towards a $5 trillion economy vision of the government.
Right. Of course, the immediate priority is on getting vaccines as soon as possible and getting those vaccines from Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, and AstraZeneca. Mukesh Aghi, Congressman Krishnamoorthi, thank you very much for joining us here on CNBC TV 18, giving us your perspective on how India can fight this crisis and how US-India partnership can help the world at this time. Thank you very much for joining us.